All right, everyone. So I wanted to make a video tutorial of the mixing techniques that you'll need to use for project one. I figured this might be the best way to go over these techniques. That way you can go through and follow along at your own pace. There's a lot of little sort of ins and outs of logic that are really necessary for this. This way you can pause, you can go back and work through at your own speed. So I have the specific requirements for mixing here. We talked about these in class. The first two are general things that'll be achieved by doing all the other things, right? A well-balanced sound, and you're limited to the gain, EQ, reverb, and compression. Plugins, the main goal being the well-balanced sound. You can use effects like EQ, reverb creatively. So you can do things beyond just trying to sound realistic. You could place your instruments in a large hall if that's appropriate for the song. So you're not only limited to realism. Make sure all your tracks have a low roll-off EQ insert. Make sure each track has a compressor and the threshold is low enough that the compressor is engaging, right? So we covered that a little bit in class, but I want to go over that a little bit more in depth. We talked about the difference between sends and inserts. We'll go practice how to employ both of those strategies for reverb or other effects. Make fades when needed to avoid pops in your audio regions, and make use of panning. You don't have everything panned to the center, so create some sense of stereo image in your mix, and have at least one instance of volume automation. You can use panning automation if you wish, but it's not required. So setting not just a static mix level, but finding the parts of your performance that might need some volume boost, or some parts that might need to be lowered so everything can sit together dynamically. So one of my favorite things to do to start off is just keep everything organized. So let's hit Alt-C, right? So Alt-C, if you hit that keyboard command, that will give you the color panel there. Let's make our guitar brown, our bass, we'll make it orange, and our vocal red. Very appropriate fall color scheme there. So we did some listening to the tracks in class.
Say a word, said the looking stern. Didn't have to ask how you were feeling.
And we determined that the vocals are a little bit too quiet in the mix compared to the guitar. So I'm going to turn everything down. So the vocal I'll turn down the least. I'll start at about -2. The bass I'll turn down a more substantial amount to about -8. And the guitar, let's say about -7. So remember, if you need to get your mixer window up, it's Command 2 is a quick key for that. And then you want to close it, Command W will close that window. So let's see where we're at now.
Up the stairs, locked the door. I went to sleep on a hardwood floor. Is it over?
So the overall balance is better. We're at a spot now where we can start to work on the finer details of the mix, but that will give us a better balance of the instruments. Again, we'll continue to balance that through EQ and now through compression. So the volume is sort of your first step, your first line of defense. So let's start right here on the third point here. Make sure each track has a low roll-off EQ. Now you can access the EQ by selecting each individual track in your main window and hitting EQ. Right? And Logic has lots of great built-in redundancy of different ways of doing the same thing. So if you go in the mix, if you did the same thing and you clicked on this EQ right here, you could also turn on EQ in the mix window. So let's go instrument by instrument. So the strategy we're looking for here is where are the actual low notes of the performance, and where is that rumble that might come from room noise, that might come from interference, or it might come from the sound of an air conditioner or something like that. So we talked about in class, those will accumulate. So every sort of like sound that you have, and you have 10, 15 tracks, so all that noise will build up. It will also interfere with the bass instrument. If we're thinking about how we hear a sound, those low frequencies need more amplification. And it's best in your mix if you just designate one or perhaps possibly two if they're rhythmically alternating low instruments. So our bass will be a low instrument in this mix. Let's go ahead and we'll just do a low roll off, and let's solo the guitar. Go back to your main window, hit solo. See a little bit of information here around the 30 hertz. But we see like the actual low peaks of those guitar chords are around 100. So I moved that red dot to move this high pass, and you can control the slope by pushing this where it says has a decibels per octave reading right there. So you can make that a higher slope. So let's leave it around 100. The bass, let's take a quick look at that. Look for the peaks. So I don't really see anything that's an actual peak. I do see some rumble below about 40 hertz. So I'll go and I'll say, let's have a nice roll off around 40 hertz. Again, the bass is our low instrument, so we don't want to take too much off the low. And these might seem like really subtle changes, but they'll make a cumulative big difference. Then let's go to listen to the vocals.
I tried to call your mom, but there's no response. Why won't you take my phone calls? Is it over?
So most of the energy is sort of in this mid-range right here, right? If we think about the human voice, there's occasionally some sort of rumble down here that we'll take out. We don't want to take away any of the warmth of the voice, so maybe we won't go too much past 100 or 120.
I know you think you know, but this is out of control. Tell me now how it's going down, 'cause I'm freaking out.
So that covers the required EQ. You can also make aesthetic choices on your EQ to make the mix sit better. Perhaps in the
I know you think you know, but this is...
You want to add a little more comprehensibility to vocals. You might give a slight boost in what's called air. This area is sort of above 10K here, or even around 8K.
Out of control. Tell me now how it's going down, 'cause I'm freaking out.
That's one thing you might do. You might also say in the guitar to take out some of the mids, right? Maybe it sounds a bit boomy and has some like too much that boxy sound right around 500 or 800.
Whoa, say something.
Dip it there.
Just say something.
Give it a little bit more sheen up in the 6K sort of region. These are all things that you'll develop over time and through some research of what sounds good of different instruments. There are some factory settings if you wanted to experiment with some of these based on instrument, voice. Those are good starting places, and then you could always adjust it for your performance. So moving along, right, let's go ahead and say, okay, we've done that. We'll just change the color of that text. Make sure every track has a compressor. So let's go in, open your mix window, Command 2. And if you follow up here, right, we have our setting, gain reduction, EQ, input, audio effects. So your compressor is going to go in that audio effects. Now, if you hover your cursor, you'll see this gray area turn dark gray. Click there. And your compressor might be here in your recently used. If it's not, you can go in Dynamics, Compressor. And this will bring up a compressor with a default set of settings. If you hold down the Control key, or excuse me, the Alt Option key, you can drag a copy of that effect to each channel. So now I have my EQ and my compression on each channel. So let's start with our guitar. Again, with the compressor, the main controls that you're thinking about here are the threshold and the ratio. The threshold is where does the compressor turn on? At what point does the compressor become active? At what sort of level of signal? So if you turn it all the way up, it would only turn on when the signal goes across that 0.0 limit. But you might want it to come in a little bit sooner, maybe let's say at -10. So anytime you have something above -10, the compressor will turn on. The ratio is how much are you going to reduce that signal once it comes in by a 2-to-1 ratio, a 3-to-1, 4-to-1, and etc. So we talked about 2 being a low setting for compression, about 4 being a moderate, and above 4 being sort of a higher level of compression. Makeup is how much gain you want to add. If you're compressing a signal you're taking away from the highs, do you want to boost everything up to make sort of compensate for that loss of volume? So there's an auto gain setting if you want to compensate. If you just want to take out the loudest parts of that recording, make sure your auto gain is off. So depending on the instrument, you might want to have auto gain on or off. Let's check out our guitar here.
You headed up the stairs, locked the door. I went to sleep on a hardwood floor. Is it over? Whoa, say something. Well, just say something. Well, just say something.
That sounds pretty good right there. If you're new to compression, this -5 is a good marker for you to sort of to hit, right? You're getting a little bit of gain reduction, 5 decibels of gain reduction, which will smooth everything out without making a huge drastic change. If you're going up to 10, that's maybe if you have a loud drum performance or something that needs a lot of taming. But usually around -5 or even less is good. So you're just going to control those knobs there. I don't want too much compression on the guitar. I did 2 decibels. I could always change that later. And I didn't want the guitar to be too quiet, so I did use the auto gain with the -12 setting. Try to avoid using this 0 dB setting. It's going to be too loud for most applications. So let's take a look at the bass, and I'll just solo the bass so I can hear that. So I used a pretty similar setting for the bass. I didn't want the bass to be too pokey, to poke out too much. So I used a little bit higher attack. I could lower the threshold a little bit, and let's see how that sounds. And I turned the auto gain off. I felt like the bass might be a little too loud with that auto gain on, and I could compensate by just taking that volume and pushing it up a little bit. That's sounding pretty good. Last, I'll do my vocals here.
Just say something. I woke up off the swollen floor. One eye closed, watch you slam the door. Where you going?
So that's sounding pretty good. There's a nice feature also on the compressor. You can add a little bit of nice sort of analog modeled distortion. This will give it a little bit of that sort of like warmth of analog gear without clipping. So let's see what that sounds like on the vocals.
You still won't respond, not even bon voyage. Hopped in your car and let it roar. Will I see you again? I tried to call your mom, but there's no response. Why won't you take my phone calls? Is it over?
So now we have compression to sort of blend everything even more so than just volume by itself. So let's go ahead and highlight that next point there. Reverb. Moving on to reverb is our next step here. So we could go ahead on each track and make an independent instance of reverb by adding it as an insert, just like we did for EQ and compression. It might be nice for contrast, to set this up as a send. So I'll show you guys a really efficient way of adding a send. So if you want to add a send and you know you're going to send all 3 channels to it, you can click on your mixer, hold the shift key, and select all 3 tracks. And let's go ahead, we'll create a number of reverbs. we'll just go crazy and create 3 reverbs just to have some different options here. So reverb is good to think about that. That's the sound of a sound in a space, a physical place, right? So we'll have one kind of shorter reverb, and I had written this down. This is a small space, and you go into rooms, and I like the villa staircase. Let's see if we can find that. Villa parlor. .3, so it's gonna be down here. Villa stairway. I also like the 2.0 vocal plate. So now we're gonna go into reverb, large spaces, plates, 2.0 vocal plate C. Feel free to pause the video if you need to catch up there. And we'll even get an even longer reverb. We'll go into reverb, large spaces, and rooms. This is let's go with Vintage Hall. So now how we turn on our send to these effects. Now we've created these new channels, and we want to determine how much signal are we going to send to these channels. So we can click on each channel and say, I want to send the original signal -7 or -8 or -15. So you can turn this knob and you'll see a little green dial come up, right? So this is our, if we look down, this is our guitar. We'll send a little bit to the small reverb, just to create a sense that that was recorded in a physical space, and a little bit of each of those. So let's listen to that.
I know you think you know, but this is out of control. Tell me now how it's going down, 'cause I'm freaking out.
That'll give just a sense of this was recorded in this big mansion, right? In this villa staircase. Now for the larger reverb, this might be really nice to have a little bit more of this on the vocals and just a little bit on the other instruments. So now I'm going to put a good amount of this on the vocals.
Oh, say something. Just say something. Just say something.
Yeah. So now we have that vocal sort of standing out, sounding like it's in that bigger space. This is going to help increase the emotional impact of that performance. Could even go and have a little bit of this larger reverb and add this to the instruments as well.
I came home late last night, didn't know if I should be frightened by you. I walked through that door, barely touched the floor, and there you were sitting in your chair staring at me.
So adjust the levels to where they sound good to you. Think of this like adding salt to food. You want to add it to the point where the flavors pop, but it's not over salted, right? Think about this as adding that color and getting that nice reverberation, but not to the point where things sound like they're swimming in a sea of reverb. Generally speaking, less reverb on bass instruments, more reverb on mid and high instruments. So the vocals and the guitar will get a little bit more than the bass. So we're moving right along. So we've covered our reverb and we used it for each instrument as an auxiliary track. Make use of fades where it's needed to avoid pops in your audio regions. So these performances all sound pretty good. They were probably edited together, comped together, so they have no missed notes or anything like that. But in the course of recording, those things happen, right? So let's find an example just to practice this technique on the guitar. Let's listen to our guitar here.
By you.
Let's say for some reason we didn't like the measure that we had here. So you can trim that region. That's Command T. And you could say, there's a mistake here, which there actually isn't, but for our purposes, there is a measure 14. So it's that minor chord there. Let's see if we can find another version of that same chord. Looks like we have that same chord right here. So, right, let's say, okay, I'm going to get rid of this measure, and I'm going to make a copy of this measure. Again, your hotkey for that is you hold the Option key, the Alt key, and you can drag a copy. Now, what might happen is you might not have a zero crossing at that very moment. It looks like we did okay, but you might not always do so well. So what you could do to make sure you have a good zero crossing is click on your secondary tool that's up here. Your secondary tool is engaged when you have the Command key on. Highlight that area, and now you have created a crossfade. And you want to do that on the front end of that region and on the back end. This will create any, or remove actually the pops. Sounds very seamless. There's no way to tell as from a listener's perspective that is not a single performance, right? It sounds very clean. We've sort of covered up any traces of there being an edit right there. So that's basically what this point is about. All right, we're moving right along. So we moved on to now we're looking at panning. Don't just have everything panned to the center. So often you want to have your star instrument in the center and your other supporting instruments panned off to the sides. In a larger mix, you'd have your kick, your bass, and your vocal right in the center. As this is more of like a chamber ensemble or like a very acoustic ensemble, we can pan the bass, but maybe keep it relatively still close to the center. Just keep those bass frequencies nice and evenly paired across your speakers. And let's just go ahead and we'll pan the guitar in the other direction. So we leave our voice in the center and pan. You go determine what sounds to you. I wouldn't go with an extreme panning of this, but you can, pan up to 15 degrees on each side or 25, whatever sounds good to you. So this will just create a little bit of sense of space. Let's go ahead and listen to that.
Over. Whoa, say something. Well, just say something. Well, just say something to me. When I woke up off the swollen floor, one eye closed, watch you slam the door. Where you going? You still won't respond, not even bon voyage. Hopped in your car and let it roar. Will I see you again? I tried to call your mom, but there's no response.
So I made some adjustments to the guitar there as I was listening. I felt like it was coming out too much with the vocals, so I adjusted the compressor. Those are things that you'll find. You'll work on something, you'll want to go adjust something else. This is part of the process of mixing. So finally, we've done some panning, and there might be some parts of our mix that we need some automation for. So I'm just going and highlighting all these sort of things that I've finished. We talked about just looking at these audio waveforms. We can see that the vocals are quieter in this sort of bridge section of the song. So remember, your hotkey for automation is the A key on the keyboard. If you hit the A, you'll see automation for each track. Now, if you click on that gray line, it'll become yellow. And now you can add what are called nodes. Nodes are just points that allow you to create separate segments of that line. So let's just do a quick edit. We're going to say, I'm just going to take that whole bridge and I'm going to bring it up to unity gain. Let's see if that works.
And I don't want to feel like it's gone. We've had this love for far too long to just give up without a word. We can fix this.
So I found that first I automated up to Unity, which is 0.0, and that seemed too much. So I just brought it down a little bit. That's what you can do in this project, is you can try things out, maybe go too far and bring it back. That's always a great mix technique. Pull something down until you can't hear it and then bring it back in, or vice versa. So again, you could add as many node points as you want. You could go, each word of this phrase or each 2 words of this phrase have a different gain level, right? Often you'll see mixers do that. And that's sort of basically like a manual compression if you think about it, right? Compression is doing that on a more sort of automated scale. You could go through and each phrase of the song have a different volume to blend it. You don't have to do that. For time, I might not recommend you do that, but you could, right? We also talked about the other way that you can do automation is using the latch. So you would click on whichever track you wanted to automate, let's say our vocal. You turn on latch, and latch will record any movement that you do on the track. So that's pan, that could be volume sends, or reverb sends. So if you wanted to like make one really end of a phrase really pop and put a lot of reverb, you could do that. So make sure once you've done what you want to latch, turn it off, put it back on read. So let's go ahead and let's just practice that. So if I turn on latch, I hit the play button.
And I don't want to feel like it's gone. We've had this love for far too long to just give up without.
So every time I'm changing the fader value, it's mapping that. I think maybe that was a little bit too active for the session, that particular section of the song, but that's a great way to do it, especially if you like to have more tactile and sort of embodied feedback in the program. So let's go ahead and put it back on read, right? Be careful with the latch. I'll warn you guys that. So we've covered these last 2 points here. We're doing pretty good, right? So this doesn't necessarily mean that your mix is done. Let's just highlight here, right? You want to now that you've done all of the sort of nitty gritty, reflect on these 2 points. Is the sound well balanced, right? Have you achieved what you wanted to achieve through your use of EQ and compression? So this is like, once you've achieved all these goals, reflect on if you are where you're at. You may need to go back and change the volume. You may need to go back and change the EQ or change the compressor. It's a dynamic process rather than just a linear A, B, C, D. As you're adjusting one thing, you might find you need to adjust something else. But that's the process of mixing. And just make sure you get all these strategies. All these strategies don't guarantee you'll have the best mix, but they will guarantee that you are using the tools that are needed to create a balanced sound and to get your instruments working together. For one bonus, I'll show you all one of my favorite tricks, just to get your track at sort of the volume that might be common amongst other commercial recordings. Once your mix is done and you make sure you're not overloading the master bus, you can go in and put on an adaptive limiter on the master channel there. Give yourself a little headroom, maybe 0.5 or maybe even 1 decibel of headroom. And this is sort of an insurance against clipping. Now you can say, all right, let's get this mix a little bit louder. So when I send it to my client or to a friend, they will kind of be able to hear it in their Apple Music or on their Google Play, and it will sound sort of, relatively comparable to other songs. So
I walked through that door, barely touched the floor, and there you were sitting in your chair staring at me.
So here's before, here's after.
You wouldn't say a word, sat there looking stern. I didn't have to ask how you were feeling.
So this will give you 5 decibels of gain of the overall mix. and setting a ceiling of negative 0.5. So this will help make your mix louder without clipping. And I usually set it to the point where only the loudest peaks are being reduced. So remember, a limiter is basically a compressor with the highest amount of reduction. So you're reducing what's sort of technically an infinity to zero amount of reduction, or what's called a brick wall limiter. So you're stopping any signal from passing a point that you specify, in this case 0.5. So that should be some really good guides for mixing. Definitely let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.